The G20 summit in the Argentinian capital of Buenos Aires is well and truly underway, with the opening plenary session in progress as we speak. Despite obvious awkwardnesses, so to speak, between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and Prince bin Salman being sidelined at the group photo op that kicked off the summit, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin sharing cold vibes with the cancellation of their bilateral. One man was spreading all the warmth and camaraderie with what can only be called as hug-plomacy. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave away warm hugs to quite a few world leaders at the opening ceremony, from Turkish leaders to those from the Netherlands and Mexico. PM Modi welcomed one and all to this crucial 13th G20 summit, where India is set to take on a leadership role among other global powers. And the Indian Prime Minister's body language certainly set the tone for that. With so many big guns at one venue, there's bound to be some power play. G20 will witness some significant meetings and some awkward encounters. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has a packed schedule. He's already met the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the United Nations Chief Antonio Guterres on the sidelines of the summit. He is scheduled to meet German Chancellor Angela Merkel and hold bilateral meetings with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, among others.
यह वर्ष हमारे द्विपक्षीय संबंधों के लिए बहुत ही अच्छा और महत्वपूर्ण रहा है। मुझे विश्वास है कि अगला वर्ष इससे भी ज़्यादा अच्छा रहेगा। वुहान में हमारा इनफॉर्मल समिट हमारे संबंधों में एक मील का पत्थर था। इससे हमारे एंगेजमेंट को नया मोमेंटम मिला और हमारे सहयोग के लिए कई नए आयाम भी खुले। अगले वर्ष इनफॉर्मल समिट के लिए हम आपका भारत में स्वागत के लिए बहुत ही उत्सुक हैं। एक्सेलेंसी, हमारी मुलाकातों द्वारा लीडर्स के स्तर पर हमारे द्विपक्षीय सहयोग का रिव्यू और इस संदर्भ में हमारे दिशा निर्देश मोमेंटम को बनाए रखने में सहायक है।
But it's the trilateral meetings which are hogging the headlines this time around, and this will be a bit of a tightrope walk for India. Remember, the overarching issue at the summit is the US-China trade war. India finds itself wedged between two powerful sides and wants to work with both. PM Modi's first trilateral will be with Japan and America. It's the first of its kind meeting. The second trilateral is with Russia and China, something that's happening after a gap of 12 years. The Trump-Modi-Abe meeting will be taking place in the backdrop of China's increasingly assertive role in the Indo-Pacific region. The area is said to be rich in mineral, oil and natural resources. The United States has been conducting patrols in the region to assert freedom of navigation. China, at the same time, continues to build up and militarize many of the islands it controls here. Next comes the meeting with China and Russia. Remember, this will be PM Modi's fourth meeting in 8 months with Chinese President Xi Jinping. While India sees a strategic partner in America, it doesn't want the partnership at the cost of peace with China. This trade war isn't India's to fight, and that's why Prime Minister Modi's two trilateral meetings are a fine balancing act in ties with Beijing and Washington. We must note that little may change in this matrix in the foreseeable future. Japan's Prime Minister Abe has just begun his second term in office. China's President Xi Jinping has an unlimited term. Donald Trump is in the middle of his 4-year presidential term, and India's Prime Minister Modi is bullish about his chances in the 2019 elections to come back to power. Leaders here are projected to occupy their respective offices for a while. So the maneuvering in Argentina will pave the way forward for India's relations with both the blocs. And now we have World is One's principal diplomatic correspondent Siddhant Sibbal, who's been getting us non-stop live updates from the Argentinian capital. Joining us live here on Today Tonight. Siddhant, quite a start to this G20 summit, especially with the Prime Minister Modi's hug-plomacy, so to speak.
Well, India seems to be the flavor of the season here at the G20 summit, with the Indian Prime Minister getting all the good photo ops. But the family photo was something that everyone was keenly awaiting for, because this is something that shows geopolitics in one picture. And if that was some description of the geopolitics, we saw how the Saudi Crown Prince was sidelined, while US President Donald Trump having not so positive vibes with the Russian president after the cancellation of talks with him, which were due to happen. And of course, the Indian Prime Minister standing in the second row, having a good camaraderie with rest of the world leaders. And then, of course, the summit has begun. Before that, it was a high decibel talk at the informal BRICS leaders meet, which took place on the sidelines of G20 summit. Remember, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi raised the issue of terror, economic offenders, and the issue of black money, something that has been the key things which he has been raising all through the G20 events, starting from 2014, when he first addressed the first G20 summit after taking charge in Brisbane. But at the BRICS, focus was on terror and radicalization by the Indian Prime Minister. That was something to send out a message to countries in our own very region that have been perpetrating terror attacks, not only in India but in Afghanistan, and have been in denial mode and continuing with the double policy of not only double crossing, but in a sense a policy that is impacting the entire region. But the other big thing that has happened till now, in India's perspective, is the bilateral with the Chinese President Xi Jinping with the Indian Prime Minister, something that has happened for the fourth time. And in that briefing, we saw the Indian Prime Minister talking about the Wuhan informal meet which took place, and saying that the momentum should continue. He recalled the meetings on the sidelines of SCO and the BRICS, and he also invited the Chinese president for the informal meet next year in 2019. So, packed schedule for the Indian Prime Minister. Nonetheless, he is someone who is getting all the positive attention at this fractious G20 summit.
Siddhant Sibal of World is One getting us that latest update from the G20 summit in Buenos Aires. Thank you, Siddhant, for joining us. Earlier, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke at the meeting of the BRICS countries on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Buenos Aires. PM Modi talking about terror financing.
Your Excellency, हमने सभी देशों से FATF मानकों के कार्यान्वयन का आग्रह किया है। आतंकवादियों के नेटवर्क, उनकी फाइनेंसिंग और उनकी आवाजाही को रोकने के लिए संयुक्त राष्ट्र के काउंटर टेररिज्म फ्रेमवर्क को मजबूत करने हेतु ब्रिक्स और G20 देशों को साथ मिलकर काम करना होगा। आर्थिक अपराधियों और भगोड़ों के विरुद्ध हमें मिलकर काम करने की आवश्यकता है।
PM Modi there saying that terror financing will top the agenda, and that the Financial Action Task Force, or the FATF, needs to strengthen, as the issue of economic offenders is a major concern as well all over the world. BRICS leaders have called for a joint war on terror. In a joint statement, the leaders said that they condemned terror attacks against member nations and urged the world to combat terrorism under the United Nations' guidance and through a comprehensive approach against terror. And now we have Ray Locker, senior journalist and national security editor for USA Today, joining us live from Washington. Ray, thank you so much for taking time to be with us here on World is One. A very interesting beginning to this G20 summit, as I was just discussing with my colleague Siddhant in Buenos Aires. Prince Mohammed bin Salman being sidelined in that group photo op, lots more on the table. India taking a leadership role at this G20 summit.
Well, as it should be. I mean, obviously, the Indian government has a lot to do here. As you mentioned, this will be the fourth meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi. That's a big deal. I mean, these are countries that have had long rivalry, border clashes, more than 50 years ago. A lot of tensions there. It looks like both governments are seeking to tamp down any kind of problems and kind of fill the vacuum created by the United States kind of stepping away from some of these issues.
Right. But apart from that, there is this whole diplomacy that is going on, as we were just discussing. Prime Minister Modi setting the tone really as a world leader right from the word go, right at the opening ceremony, sort of welcoming all the other world leaders to this summit, which is in a sense, India is not just somebody attending it, India is somebody sort of hosting this as well.
Yeah, even though it's in Argentina. I mean, that just shows the nature of how Prime Minister Modi does business. From the time he took office, when President Obama was here, inviting the president to India for the major parade there, reaching out to President Trump, reaching out to the Indian diaspora in the United States. He's been a very dynamic leader who is trying to assert India's independence and economic growth, and I think he's been doing a tremendous job of it so far.
All right, but Ray, when it comes to serious business, apart from the bilaterals, all eyes this time around are on the trilaterals. India performing this balancing act, a trilateral with US and Japan on one hand, and another trilateral with Russia and China on the other hand.
Yeah, I think these trilaterals are fascinating. The Russia-China-India meeting has tremendously high stakes, and I think India is well poised to take advantage of it. Same with the one with Japan and President Trump. I mean, Prime Minister Modi has done very well working with President Trump. Prime Minister Abe in Japan has worked hard to establish his relationship with the president, too. So I think these are three countries that have a lot in common. They're trying to limit China's influence somewhat. I think that would have been done better with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which President Trump scrapped last year. But they're working on doing things that help all three countries, and I think there's a lot to work on there.
Right. But all said and done, Ray, this time around, what is topping the agenda, as Prime Minister Modi himself put it, is action on terror financing. They're making it very specific this time around. Terror generally tops the agenda at most global forums, but this time around, this G20 summit, which is about the biggest economies in the world, the crackdown is set to be on terror financing.
That's hugely important. I mean, all of the major economic powers in the world have problems with terrorism and concerns about terrorism. China does, Russia does, India does, the United States does. All four of those countries have had major terrorist attacks since the year 2000 that have destabilized elements of their economy and made people nervous. And money and how it flows from country to country is a major part of how terrorism thrives. And if you look at what happened 10 years ago in Mumbai, there was money that was floating around from one place to another that, if it had been stopped effectively, may have stopped those attacks from happening. And I think the same thing is true with the 9/11 attacks in the United States. People cannot commit terrorist activities on a large scale without the flow of money. And it's very hard to stop, but a united effort with the major economic powers in the world can go a long way to doing that.